Hey everybody, it's Brandon, and welcome back to another episode of Murata Media. And that little intro at the beginning was how I felt the entire ride home after I went to the movies and I watched Midsommar. This is a review that I really wanted to take my time in terms of preparation because there is so much that I want to talk about, and this is a movie that I feel you can't just pump out a review right after seeing it. I really needed time to process it and study it a little bit more so that way I can fully express my feelings about it. So without further ado, let's get into the review. This is the second film that was directed by Ari Aster, whose debut film Hereditary was released last year. And Hereditary was met with some pretty high praise from both critics and fans alike. I, on the other hand, was not too fond of it. I thought it was very slow and a little too boring. The story didn't really do much for me. And Hereditary was also very unintentionally hilarious at times. That being said, I fully do understand why people liked Hereditary as much as they did. It had great direction, very nice cinematography, and a very breathtaking performance from Toni Collette. It was also very unsettling, disturbing, and it was very different. I hadn't seen any movie like that before. So in short, Hereditary was a very well-made film, and I fully understand its appeal. It just wasn't for me. But when I saw that Ari Aster had a second movie coming out, I was already sold. Midsommar tells the story of a girl named Dani who has just gone through a very unfathomable tragedy. So to help cope with her grief, she goes on a trip to Sweden with her boyfriend Christian and his friends to this festival. And when they get there, they realize that the festival may look nice, but not everything is as it seems. And just like Hereditary, this movie did a lot of the same things really well, if not better. Well, first off, like I said, Toni Collette was great in Hereditary, and Florence Pugh is fantastic as the lead role of Dani in Midsommar. She really had a lot of range in her character, going from extreme sadness and grief to anger and just unhappiness. And it's not just her, the entire cast here is pretty great. And a big reason for why the cast and characters work so well is that this movie has really solid writing. I found myself being very entertained by this movie's first half when they're still in America and right when they get to Sweden. The dialogue between this group felt very real and authentic. It didn't seem like they were actors reading lines from a script. It seemed almost as if they have been friends for years and the conversations just flowed naturally. And something else that's really great about the writing in Midsommar is that this movie was actually really funny. It doesn't rely on humor too much, but the times when it does decide to have a humorous moment, it hits the nail on the head almost every time. And something else that was fantastic about Midsommar was its cinematography. In this part of Sweden that they're in, it's almost always daytime, while nighttime is about half the time that it normally is. And the fact that it's always daytime makes for some really beautiful scenery. The trees, the shrubs, the houses of the area are in, they're all so vibrant in color that they just jump off the screen. It's all so pretty to look at that there are several frames of this movie that could be turned into paintings and they would look great on your wall. There's a lot of shots I love where the characters are framed to be the main focus of the shot, but in the background there's always something happening, whether it be people dancing, people working, or people just going about their day. I really love that attention to detail because it made the shots feel alive. There's also some very unique shots at the beginning of this movie that I found particularly cool, where a character is on screen in the frame and there's another character that they're talking to off frame, and that character appears in a mirror and they're talking to them. And I thought it was a really unique way to have the characters interact with one another instead of the standard over-the-shoulder shot. And to combine both the acting and the cinematography together, this movie has a lot of one takes, and the one takes are done so well. It's amazing that the characters were able to just keep the scene going as well as they did without having to cut. And of course, that's all helped by Ari Aster's terrific direction. Now, I'm not a professional by any means, but I would say that editing is sort of my forte. And something that I like to do when I'm editing a film of any kind is to have the scene paced a little bit slower in terms of cutting, and that's something that Midsommar does really well. It takes its time in terms of editing. Editor Lucian Johnston does a really great job of taking his time to cut a scene together. He doesn't cut every so often to the point where it's becoming just so disorienting to watch. Another thing he did great in the final cut was his continuity. Now, I'm a stickler for continuity. I always need to make sure that the movements of the characters match with the frame that they were in before. And for the most part, whenever a character is moving and they make a cut to a different angle, their blocking almost matches identically. And I really love that attention to detail because most people seem to just throw continuity onto the sidelines. And lastly, there were some really cool transitions in here. They were so smooth and the flow from cut to cut was almost seamless. And this cut appears in the trailers, but there's one particular transition when Danny goes into a bathroom in an apartment and the camera goes up above the door frame, and when it passes the door frame, she's in an airplane bathroom, and it's done so effortlessly that it almost makes your jaw drop. Something that I thought was really interesting about this movie is that the story was more focused on Danny and Christian's relationship. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, Danny has gone through this awful tragedy and Christian has been contemplating breaking up with her for quite some time. So it's pretty clear that their relationship is starting to just crumble before their very eyes. Neither of them really wants to admit it, and there's some really clever symbolism and parallelism to their relationship. Like, take the village that they go to, for example. It may seem like everything is all fine and dandy on the surface, but when you look a little bit deeper, you find that everything about it is not what it seems to be. There's also a scene in the movie when Christian does something really douchey to Danny, and he tries to make up for it with a cake. And as he's trying to light the candle just will not light because the flame isn't working. And that's pretty symbolic of their relationship, because they're trying to keep this flame between them alive, but no matter how hard they try, it's just not igniting. This is also a movie where you really need to pay as close attention as you can because there is a lot of foreshadowing going on. Most of it is told through paintings and drawings that you kind of just see throughout. Like, there's this building that they stay in once they get to the festival, and the walls and ceiling are just covered with all these exuberant paintings. In a way, that building kind of serves as the dollhouse from Hereditary, because it basically tells the entire story right before your very eyes. So it's little things like that that you really need to keep an eye out for. And now is the time where I will talk about the things in Midsommar that I wasn't too keen on. I mentioned at the beginning of the review that Hereditary had a lot of scenes that were just really unintentionally hilarious, and there are scenes like that in Midsommar too, because they're just so out there that they come off as funny. But there is one scene in this movie that is just so bizarre, and I don't even know what else to say about it. And I'm not going to spoil anything about it, but the only thing that I'll say is that it's a sex scene. As we were all watching, my friends were just cracking up at it the entire time, but I was sitting there more like, what the fuck is happening right now? And that's something that I thought kind of brought Midsommar down a little bit. It gets really, really weird in parts, and it seems like it only does it for the sake of being weird. Something else that I didn't quite understand is that there's this side plot involving Christian and one of the other guys in the group whose name is Josh. And Josh is writing his thesis on the culture of the villagers and the festival itself. And Christian expresses to him his desire to also write his thesis about the same thing. And this pisses off Josh, and it kind of causes friction between them. But I feel like it didn't really serve a purpose, and ultimately it just felt kind of useless. If anyone can explain to me what purpose this served in the movie, then I will probably forgive it, but as of right now, it just didn't make much sense to me. And that's pretty much the extent of the things that I didn't quite like about the movie, but now I kind of wanted to get into my interpretation of the whole thing. As I mentioned, this movie is more so about Danny and Christian's toxic relationship, and how Danny seemed kind of codependent on Christian throughout the whole thing. And Christian clearly does not want to be in this relationship anymore, but he feels obligated to stay with her because he feels pity for her. And something that's discussed throughout the entire movie is how the people of the festival interpret things such as life and death. They interpret life as if it's the 4 seasons. Like, birth is spring, and your prime years, I believe 18 to 36 is summer. When you get past that is fall, obviously. And then I believe when you get to 64 is when it's winter, which symbolizes the end of your life. And after they show Danny, Christian, and all the other tourists this really disturbing ritual that they do, they tell them that they see life and death as this great gift. And obviously Danny does not see death as a gift, she sees it more as a tragedy. And when she goes through that, she pours all her trauma onto Christian, and that's kind of what causes their relationship to drift apart even more. And while Christian doesn't really give a shit about Danny, the locals in Sweden who were there at the festival seem to really take a liking to her. And they help supply her with that dependency that she's so reliant on, that Christian just is not giving to her. In a way, I guess my interpretation is that the movie is telling the audience that life is too short to have all this unhappiness and toxicity in it. You need to cut the bad things out of your life and learn to start living more. And if you've seen the movie, if you take into consideration everything that I just said, this movie kind of, in a way, had a happy ending. A really fucked up, twisted ending, but you could make an argument that it's a happy one. So in conclusion, guys, after seeing Midsommar, giving it a lot of thought and process in my mind, and also taking time to research the deeper meanings of the film, I really liked it. This is also the first movie I've seen this year that I could definitely see getting some Oscar buzz pretty soon. And I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that Ari Aster will be nominated for Best Director, Florence Pugh for Best Actress, maybe because Toni Collette wasn't nominated last year, Best Original Screenplay, Best Cinematography, and possibly Best Editing. And overall, I would give Midsommar a 7 out of 10. Guys, thank you so much for watching my review of Midsommar. Did you guys see it? Did you hate it? Were you really disturbed by it? Or did you like it just as much as I did? If you like my review, then be sure to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe too. If you haven't seen my past reviews, I'll link those right over here. Other than that, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you all next time.